Hi, so this presentation is on the Recovering America's Wildlife Act of 2023. There's been several others, but this one is specifically about the 2023 one that was introduced in March. So what it is, it provides funds for conserving wildlife and plant species of greatest concern, greatest need, especially threatened and endangered ones. A portion of it must also be used to fund the state fish and wildlife departments for conservation purposes. And then it also creates funds for Native American tribes to get money to further their conservation efforts. So as far as the funding, it'll invest 1.3 billion to state fish and wildlife agencies and then 97 million for tribal wildlife conservation efforts. It'll create many jobs in construction, forestry, and outdoor recreation. Those are some of the arguments for it. The majority of the funding used to be from hunting and fishing licenses, equipment, etc., which led to majority of conservation efforts being focused specifically on game species, not all of conservation, all ecosystems, the bigger picture of everything. So this act requires that states give funding by state basis based on the number of threatened or endangered species and just keeping with the general healthy ecosystem of each state. So the main sponsor was Senator Martin Heinrich. He's a Democrat from New Mexico. He introduced the bill on March 30th, 2023 in the Environment and Public Works Committee. That's the committee that he's a part of in the Senate. So far, it's only been introduced and it hasn't been brought to a vote yet, but we shall see. As far as the arguments for and against this bill, generally the supports are obviously, as we all know in this program, conservation benefits all of us, not just wildlife. We need healthy ecosystems for our health and well-being as well. Also that it comes from a stable source of money that we already had for energy and minerals. And it brings in both state and tribal involvement, so everybody's involved in some way. The oppositions are, the people arguing against this would say that it takes away money from energy and mineral development because it's from that fund. They're saying that we're taking away money from those developments on federal lands, which technically in a pretty capitalist society, people that tends to be a conservative argument against stuff like this. And their other argument is states, not the federal government, should manage conservation because, as we read in the Constitution earlier, they pretty much say anything not named in the Constitution should be given to the states. And then the other opposition is just not believing this is a priority for budgeting. And we do have a lot going on in the world, but I don't think people realize how important this is. So as far as the sponsor of it, I was expecting him to have some background in natural resources. So he's a Democrat senator from New Mexico, like I said, and he got first elected in 2013. He's from Nevada, but spent most of his adult life in New Mexico, where he is a lawmaker. He received a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Missouri. And then he worked for AmeriCorps in New Mexico. And then here's where we start getting into his environmental background. Which AmeriCorps, you could argue for that as well. But he was executive director of Cottonwood Gulch Foundation, which educates young people on the environment and other natural issues. And then in 2006, he became a state's natural resources trustee. As far as how this can become a law, most that I've read of, most bills start in the House, so they have to get majority win in the House, then it goes to the Senate. I feel like that's the majority of what we hear. But since this was introduced in the Senate, it's going to first have to pass through the Senate with a majority vote. Then it'll go to the House, and once again, it needs a majority vote. And then it'll have to be signed in law by the president, which Joe Biden, being our president, who's a Democrat, and part of his shtick is that he has to at least seem like he cares about environmental issues. Is he would probably sign it into law. But if he did veto, like let's say a Republican was president right now, if it was vetoed, then it can be returned to Congress to override the presidency with 2/3 majority vote in the House and Senate. The bill has failed mainly in the past due to its funding mechanisms that they couldn't get bipartisan support for. So like in the past, it's been through regulations on cryptocurrency. So now with the new funding ways, they're hoping that they can get this through Congress, so that it would be signed by President Biden. So the State and Wildlife Grant Program, so that provides funding for federally recognized tribal governments to create programs and better manage for wildlife conservation. And that's a part of this act. And then there's also the State Wildlife Action Plan. So this is where, to receive funding through Wildlife Grants Program, each state has to submit a plan to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. These plans are created with scientists, conservationists, landowners, and other members of the public to make sure these plans have everybody's support. As far as where I live, the first species that I thought of that would be endangered was the timber rattlesnake. That's because every time I go backpacking somewhere in Ohio, and it's usually on the eastern side of the state, which is one of the only places you'll actually find in our state the timber rattlesnake. You'll see signs just telling you, please don't kill them, they're endangered, and if you see one, please report it to the ODNR. So the range has declined a lot. It reduced from 22 counties in Ohio to 8. And this is mostly due to habitat loss. They prefer mature forests, and obviously we've been knocking those down. But there's also illegal pet trades and a lot of killing due to fear by humans, which I understand from a just like human level of, this thing is really scary and I heard that it can hurt me really bad, so I'll kill it. But people don't realize there's a lot of steps that you can take to avoid that. And then just the roads going through the area, killing them, and then some diseases. So both habitat restoration efforts as well as educating the public specifically on the fear thing are improving their numbers in the state. Like I said, there's signs everywhere when I go backpacking about the timber rattlesnake and what to do and what not to do about them, just to protect that species. So that I enjoy seeing that, even though I'm not the biggest snake fan in the world. And then we also have, as far as the tribal grants, we have the cerulean warbler. So they prefer mature deciduous woodlands. They became a species of concern due to habitat loss, the usual, pollution, and then invasive species. Funds from the state tribal wildlife grant were used for research, monitoring, habitat management, outreach and education, and landowner agreements for their conservation. So that's all I have for that. Thank you, and that is all.